I moved to my dad's when I was 10 and I didn't know anyone in the area except for the family my dad was friends with. A single mom with 3 kids. Luckily there was a girl a couple years older than me. She was 12 at the time I met her, and we got to know each other a little over a couple years. We weren't close, but we ended up having the same friends. One night my friend Rob was hanging out with her and her younger brother. They happened to be in the house alone because of my friend's mom was at work. Her mother's been helping this one lady through her work and got to know her fairly well. She found out her sister was in a mental institution and was let out recently. The night Rob is hanging out with my friend, they get a knock on the door. My friend thought it was just their mom since she knocks a certain way when coming in, and he answered it without thinking. Rob wasn't supposed to be there, and he took off through the window to his house down the road. He never thought twice about it. It wasn't her mom. It was the sister of the lady her mom was helping, and she figured out from talking to her sister where her family lived and her mom's working schedule. She came in. This is where I don't know the details, and I'm glad I don't. My friend's younger brother got away to the neighbor's house to call the police. Delaney brutally murdered my friend a week from Christmas, decapitated her, and left her body naked in a bathtub. She even hit her head. They had to look through the presents, and I don't know where they found it, but they did. I wasn't allowed to go to her funeral. This happened to my wife's grandmother about 15 years ago, back when we were still dating. Her husband had passed away the previous year, but she kept herself busy by volunteering at the local library. It was a good way for her to stay active and socialize. Since it was winter, her walk home was often in the dark. The library closed at 5 p.m., but there were always a few extra tasks to wrap up before everyone left. On this particular night, she turned down a ride from another volunteer, insisting that she needed the exercise. Her house was about a mile away, through a lightly wooded area in South Texas. As she was walking, she noticed someone behind her. He was walking in the same direction and gradually gaining on her. At first, she didn't think much of it. After all, she was an older woman and not particularly fast. But something about this man seemed off. He kept getting closer until he was right behind her, matching her pace and staying close. By then, she knew something was wrong, but she could see the top of her driveway just ahead. She always left the lights on so it would look like someone was home. She just needed to make it those last 150 yards. As she got within 50 yards of her house, the man suddenly grabbed her shoulder and said, "Okay, expletive, don't turn around. Hand over your purse or I'll cut you." She paused for a second, then took a big step forward, turned around, and shot the guy in the neck with the .38 she kept in her purse. The man spent the next 5 years in a prison hospital before dying of complications from his injury. My wife's grandmother passed away last year, but even until the end, she would often say that she regretted pulling the trigger too soon. When I was young, around 8 to 11 years old, my older sister, who is 7 years older than me, would babysit me when our parents were out. At the time, she smoked a lot, and our parents made her smoke outside. I would often follow her outside, playing around and annoying her as younger siblings do. One day, my sister noticed a white SUV with a bike rack on top parked at the end of our driveway. It had the most tinted windows I had ever seen. You couldn't see inside at all. The SUV just sat there until my sister went back inside. Then it would drive to the end of the road and wait in the church parking lot. When she came out again for another smoke, it would return to the driveway. This happened a few times, and while it was odd, my sister, being brave, just ignored it. The next day, while our parents were out again, the SUV showed up once more. It would sit at the end of the driveway and just watch my sister. I knew the driver was watching her because if I stayed inside and watched from the front window, the SUV wouldn't move. She eventually told our father, who was a sheriff's deputy at the time. He called the cops and made a complaint, but when they showed up, the SUV was nowhere to be seen. Months passed with no sign of the SUV, and we started to forget about it. But then, about 9 months after it first started, and around 4 months since the last sighting, the SUV was back. It became a regular occurrence again. One day, my sister was outside smoking as usual when the SUV showed up. We were home alone, and she finally decided she had had enough. She told me to stay in the carport while she went to confront the driver. She started walking toward the SUV, but halfway down the driveway, she suddenly felt an overwhelming sense of terror. She later told us, "I felt like if I went any further, I was dead. I was paralyzed by pure fear." She turned around and went back inside. One evening, while my parents were home, my sister went outside to smoke, and I went with her. Sure enough, the SUV showed up again. She told me to run inside and tell our father. I did, and my dad promptly grabbed his gun and started briskly walking down the driveway toward the SUV, though he didn't point the gun directly at it. As soon as the driver saw my dad, the SUV floored it down the road and peeled out onto the nearby highway. My dad, being a cop, noted the year, model, and distinguishing features of the vehicle. The scariest part? The license plate had been covered in duct tape. We never saw that SUV again. When I was just 4 or 5 years old, my parents had recently separated, and I was living with my mom in a small 2-bedroom apartment. Even though I had my own room, I preferred to sleep in my mom's bed whenever I stayed with her. Our bedrooms were at the end of a hallway, directly across from each other. The apartment was on the first floor, and I remember it being the middle of summer, with the window in my mom's room open, right above the headboard. One night, I woke up and saw our cat sitting in the doorway of my mom's room. This was odd because the cat was usually curled up in bed with us. I watched as the cat slowly walked into my bedroom and meowed. I turned to wake up my mom, and in the few seconds it took to get her attention and tell her something was wrong, we both looked back at the doorway, and there was a man standing in the hall, moving out of my room. I still don't know how she managed to react so quickly, but my mom grabbed me, and in one swift motion, she threw me out of the open window screen. She jumped out right after me, and we started screaming for help. Thankfully, someone heard us and called 911. The police arrived quickly, but they found no signs of forced entry. The front door was unlocked, which led them to believe that the man had exited that way. My mom was adamant that she had locked the door that night with both the deadbolt and the chain. About a week later, while cleaning the kitchen, my mom opened the closet where the water heater was kept and found something chilling: a notebook with names and drawings, along with a pair of gloves and some gum wrappers. She called the police again, but all they could do was speculate that the man had been hiding in our apartment, waiting until we were asleep. This story is from a friend of mine, whom we'll call Minji. She's in her early 20s and works as an English tutor in South Korea. About a year ago, she shared a chilling experience that happened to her a few years earlier. One evening, Minji was tutoring a high school boy who was studying with her late into the night. As it got really late, the boy asked if he could stay over because he lived too far from home, and the buses had stopped running. Minji hesitated at first. She was uncomfortable with the idea of letting a teenage male student stay overnight. However, he pleaded, and eventually, she agreed. They went back to her one-room apartment. Minji got into her bed, and the boy made a makeshift bed on the floor. They both eventually fell asleep. A few hours later, around 2 a.m., the boy woke Minji up and said he was really hungry. Minji, half asleep, was taken aback by the request and told him it was too late to go out and that he could make some ramen from the kitchen. But the boy insisted he wasn't interested in ramen. He wanted to go to a nearby 24-hour restaurant. Minji was reluctant, but after some persistence from the boy, she agreed to go with him. As soon as they stepped outside, the boy turned to Minji and said something that froze her blood. "I'm not actually hungry. I woke up in the middle of the night and looked under your bed. There's a man sleeping there." Minji's heart raced. They immediately called the police, and when officers arrived, they discovered that a homeless man had been living in Minji's apartment for 2 months, hiding under her bed. The man had managed to remain undetected because he was hiding in a place that was only visible from the floor level, which the boy had inadvertently noticed when he was lying down. It was a terrifying realization for Minji, knowing that someone had been secretly living in her home all that time. She was grateful to the boy for his quick thinking and the alertness that led to the discovery.